give credit to your presence and the sense of anticipation of hearing from you, and knowing that our hearts are open and exposed to you, that our thoughts you already know, and that you love us and embrace us and call us to be your own. That you've committed yourself to work in us and conform in us the likeness of Jesus. Lord, we thank you for your commitment to us, your love for us, your involvement with us. Lord, you know our hearts. You know the things that have been a part of our life in this last week that have not been an honor to you or to ourselves. You know the things we've thought, the things we've said, the things we've done. Lord, for these things that fall short of you, grateful for your forgiveness, grateful for your mercy, grateful mostly for your commitment to conform us, to shape us, to make us holy, pure, the kind of people that bring honor to you. That's our desire, Lord. We just ask that today you would open our hearts and our minds, that you would give us ears that can hear. Speak to us by your Spirit, Lord, through your word. Teach us about yourself and about ourselves, and help us to know what it is that you want from us, know how to live, and deal with the trials that come our way in life, and the temptations that come our way. We want our lives to reflect you, Lord. We want that our friends would come to know you. We want that our lives would reflect you in a way that the people we know would want to know you too. So we come today, come with open hearts, come expecting, ask that we could hear you. We come down in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right. Well, I'm enjoying my time in James again. Now, you have to know, having been through Proverbs and looking at the Old Testament wisdom, and then considering James, the New Testament wisdom book, Liam and I were talking about it, and he was suggesting that maybe James is something we could consider next. I was thinking in my mind, I'm not sure if I want to. We're a part of a home group, and we just finished a study of James. And I meet with a couple of young men, and they're studying James, and so I'm walking through that with them, and I'm going, gee, can I be all excited about James again? But lo and behold, I'm here in my study and prep for time with you, and learning things, seeing things that I haven't seen in 60 years of reading the Bible. And so this has been fun. It's been fun for me. The last time we met, we looked at the first 12 verses of chapter 1 in James, and we looked at how difficult times in our lives give us an opportunity to grow in faith and trust in God. And I told you that I often have trouble with the thought, rejoice when you have trials. I'm going, that's sick. I'm going, how do you be happy when things are bad, But the whole point of James is, look beyond the troubles as to what those troubles produce in your life. They give you opportunity for patience, to develop endurance. They give you opportunity to trust God in a situation that's bigger than you and that you can't do anything about. And in that whole process, God is nurturing in us a spiritual maturity that will be strong and solid in our life. And that our faith is not just a creed, it's not just things we believe, but it's actually a life value experience in us of reality of God and His presence. And then I can see that things are changing in my life, and they're good things that are happening. But, so I can rejoice if I can reflect on it all being done. I can reflect on the end. And I was thinking of the one passage in Hebrews chapter 12 where it speaks of Jesus that looking forward to what was to come, looking forward to the glory that was to come, He endured the cross. The greatest of suffering of any human body. He was able to meet that with joy, knowing what was going to come out of his death. And that is that all of his creation could be restored, renewed in relationship with God. That there would be forgiveness for all of the things that separate us in our life from God and from one another. That there would be forgiveness, there would be mercy, there would be grace, there would be strength and energy to be people that can please God and be comfortable to be around. It's amazing when God has his way in our life, how we can get along with the people around us as well. So that was last time we were together with James chapter 1, verses 1 through 12. And in those 12 verses, James gave us 5 different life perspectives, ways to look at things that come our way in life, and gave us some wise counsel in how to think about ourselves and about our life situations. Challenged us to think about how we deal with suffering, how we handle the need for wisdom, how do we respond in faith and not doubt, what's our view of poverty and what's our view of wealth, and also embracing God's promise to bless us when we persevere through the difficult times. So what did he say? Our perspective makes a difference. Do we focus on the pain or on the end result God intends for us? Will we be resentful or grateful? Will we welcome the spiritual maturity that comes with pain? And I have to tell you that this has been a personal challenge to me. Just those 12 verses at the beginning. Coming back from a conference in Indiana with COVID. And that was not a pleasant time for us. And it's had lingering effects on our body in energy and focus, mental focus. And it has not been a pleasant time. There are a lot of things I want to do, feel like I need to do, and I just don't have the juice to do it. And I said, how do I be happy in that? I found myself grumbling more than anything. And I said, it's about time I would probably practice what I know we learned through James, and that is keep the focus on the end. This too will pass, and having gone through what we've gone through, we'll be stronger in our faith and our trust in God. And but going through it, it was a challenge, and I still have room to grow, but I don't want to say that because that means there'll probably be more trouble come my way. So I find I'm better off to cooperate and be obedient in the front end rather than learn the lessons the hard way. That seems to be my motive. So in our text today, we're going to be looking at verses 13 through 16. Well, 18. But I'm going to read just the first 13 through 16 to start with. It says in verse 13, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when, by his own evil desire, he is dragged away and enticed. Then after desire has conceived, it gives birth to sin. And sin, when it is grown, full grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, my dear brothers. And that little statement reminded me of a whole lot of Proverbs that we read related to that. Pay attention to how you live your life. There are consequences. And, but I noticed that in James 1 through 12, James addresses trials. Talks about the trials that come our way and enduring the trials. And in these verses, 13 through 18, addresses the subject of temptation. And so I was thinking, so what's the difference between trials and temptation? And so I decided to go back to the Greek text, because that was one of my majors in college, was the language. And so I said, let's go back and look at what it says. And so I'm looking at the Greek text that our English translations come from. And in the handout I gave you, in the back page, there's the scriptures all chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. It's in the back, and there's some yellow color coding on it. Do you find it there? notice that in verses 2 and 12, it's yellowed, the word trial is yellowed. And notice that in verses 13 and 14, all of the words, tempted, temptation, all of those words in verses 13, 14 that are yellowed, they are all the same Greek word. But with our translation, we get trial, we get temptation, but it's the same word. So I'm saying, what is going on here? What have I missed in translation that it doesn't appear that there's a difference? Why aren't we speaking, be happy when you're tempted instead of happy when you're in trials? I said, so what's the difference? And that was part of the fun thing that I came out of in this. And I think the text itself is what provides us understanding. Often words only have meaning within the context. I'm done in doing a performance, or Austin. He has done a recital performance on the keyboard. And he stands up and he takes a bow. Or did he take a bow and put it in his hair? So is it bow or is it bow? You know, context will tell us what it is. So in this sense, the word that's translated trial and temptation, it depends on the context that gives us understanding. The trial, though difficult for us, comes with a good purpose. And that is a purpose to provide patient endurance, perseverance, spiritual maturity. The source of the trial is external, confronting us. Temptation is a stimulus, but is driven by an internal desire, it says here. Something that becomes a temptation to us is when our inner passion, our desire, our lust pursues satisfaction. So trials come from the outside to us, and we endure those things. A temptation is something that comes from within us, out of our passions and desires for things that are opposed to God, but satisfy us. And so, although it's the same word, it's still, the word itself literally means a testing, like a trial. I think I used the example last time in a chemistry lab, that you mix two chemicals and you test to see, you try to see what it's going to do. Is it going to blow up in your face, or is it going to change colors, or what's it going to do? It's a trial. It's a testing. So you're testing. So that's the word that's the translated trial and temptation. And so both of them are a test. And so trials come to test us. Are we going to trust God and look forward to what He's doing in our life? A temptation is a test. Is where's our heart? And is our passion in life and submission to God, or are we driven by ourselves? But they're both tests. But we find there's a trial and there's the temptation. It was helpful to me thinking through what are some examples of temptation in the Scriptures. And I was looking at 1 John chapter 2, verses 15 through 17. And I have it there in your notes. I printed it out for you so you have it. Do not love the world or anything in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. For everything in the world, the cravings of sinful man, the lust of his eyes, and the boasting of what he has and does, comes not from the Father, but from the world. And the world and its desires pass away, but the man who does the will of God lives forever. So he's saying what's in our heart. Well, a translation in the New American Standard that I tend to prefer in this text is what's in our heart is the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the boastful pride of life. There's a drive in us to satisfy our fleshly wants, passions. There's a drive in us to want everything we see. And you don't have to go on to the Amazon website to realize how much there is to see and want, and how easy it is to get it. Paying for it may be another issue, but it's easy to get and want. And I think we all know and understand the pride part feeling really good and proud of things that we've accomplished, things that we've acquired. So the difference between trials and temptations, an external influence or an internal influence. Trials come from an outside source, temptations from an inside source. In verse 13 again, back in our text, in James 1, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me, for God cannot be tempted by evil, nor does he tempt anyone. But each one is tempted when by his own evil desire he is dragged away and enticed. A helpful example of this to me was the story of Job. In the Old Testament, in the writing of Job, in chapter 1 and verse 6, it says, one day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. And the Lord said to Satan, where have you come from? And Satan answered the Lord, from roaming through the earth and going back and forth in it. Then the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? And I thought, why would God do that? If he's a righteous man and good and honors you, why would you cast him off to Satan? Why would you do that? Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. Does Job fear God for nothing? Satan replied. Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? You have blessed the work of his hands so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But stretch your hand out and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. That's all Satan said. And the Lord responded to Satan, very well, then, everything he has is in your hands, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. And Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. Well, in verses 13 and through 19 that follow, we discovered that Job lost all of his vast herd of animals, oxen, donkeys, sheep, camels. Everything he owned was gone. His servants were killed. All his children died. All of that sounds pretty tragic to me. And then in verse 20 we have Job's response. At this Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. Then he fell to the ground in worship and said, naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. I think I would groan just a little. But as we learned in the first 12 verses of James, don't look at the troubles, look at the end result. And I've always found great encouragement in Job, looking at the last chapter, chapter 42, and in verse 5. In a conversation Job was having with God, Job said, I've heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eyes have seen you. And I said, for all of the troubles that came, that God gave Job over to Satan, for all those troubles, for all that loss, the end result for Job was that he came to understand he knew about God, but now he knows him. He has seen him. He's seen his hand in his life. And I said, if troubles produce an intimacy with God like this, we can endure it. And it's worth enduring. We have examples of temptation. That was an example of trial from Job, but the example of temptation we have in Luke chapter 22, verse 31. Jesus was speaking to Simon Peter. He says, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you as wheat. I'm going to shake up your life. But I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith may not fail. And when you have turned back, strengthen your brothers. I have work for you to do. But it was interesting that Peter replied, Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death. Well, the proud, self-reliant Peter soon denied he even knew Jesus. His fear of dying, his desire to protect his flesh, moved him to deny that he even knew Jesus. God gave Satan permission to tempt Simon Peter. And Peter failed. But God forgave, and Jesus gave him work to do as the leader in the church and the spokesman for him in the temple after his death and his resurrection. Another example, there also in Luke chapter 22, after the evening that Jesus spent with his disciples, the night that he introduced the concept of communion with the bread and the cup. They left the upper room where they were meeting, and they went to a garden, the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus said to his disciples, pray that you will not fall into temptation. He withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them and knelt down and prayed, Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but yours be done. He was speaking of the death that he knew was coming the next day. He knew the cross was coming. He knew he'd be arrested, he'd be tried, he'd be hung on a cross, and he would die. He knew that was coming. And he prayed, I don't want to drink this cup. I don't want to drink the wrath of the new day. But nevertheless, not my will, your will be done. That conversation happened in prayer, in night with God. And an angel from heaven appeared to him and strengthened him. And being in anguish, he prayed even more earnestly, and his sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. And when he rose up from prayer and went back to the disciples, he found them asleep, exhausted from sorrow. Why are you sleeping? He asked them. Get up and pray, so you will not fall into temptation. And it's interesting in the Lord's Prayer. What's one of the lines? And lead us not into temptation. Right? Taught us that ought to be a part of our faith, our prayer, our dependency. Prayer was Jesus' response to the temptation to avoid his death on the cross the next day. He prayed. The disciples all failed to pray. And we go back to our text today in verse 13. When tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil, or does he tempt anyone? But each one is tempted by his own evil desire, and he is dragged away and enticed. And something that was new and insightful to me here, the word evil desire is literally the Greek word for lust. Deep inner passion to satisfy myself. Lust. Evil desire. But each one is tempted when his own lust, by his own lust. And he's dragged away and enticed. And I thought it was interesting that the two words, dragged away and enticed, they're two metaphors in the Greek language here. Dragged away is a hunting term describing wild animals being lured into a trap. So they're dragged into the trap. And that's why I say our evil desire drags us into a trap. And the word enticed is a fishing term, and it means to catch with bait. There's something that's alluring to us, a lure. And as fish, we go after it, and we're caught by this bait. That's what our lust does to us. And you will recall the warning in Proverbs chapter 1. If we go back to it. The unruly gang sets a trap for an unsuspecting victim, only to be caught in their own trap. Go back to James 1, or Proverbs 1, and read that again for yourself. But James continues here in verse 15. Then after desire or lust has conceived, it gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is full grown, gives birth to death. Don't be deceived, my dear brothers. Here James compares temptation to the process of human birth. Temptation is planted in us. It's made present, conceiving. And we, in our 9-month of comparison to childbirth, during our time after temptation comes to us, we entertain thoughts about it. We make plans to act. And it happens. So as in the course of human birth, there is an introduction and a time period and delivery. So with temptation, it comes to us and we allow it to linger in our heart and our mind until we act on it. And the difference is, in birth there's life, but in temptation, when it comes to its end, there's death. And can we learn that there's consequence to the choices we make and the things that we do? I remember the story in Proverbs chapter 7, verse 6 goes like this. At the window of my house, I looked out through the lattice. I saw among the simple, I noticed among the young men, a youth who lacked judgment. And in verse 10 it says, then out came a woman to meet him, dressed like a prostitute and with crafty intent. And in verse 21 it says, with persuasive words she led him astray. She seduced him with her smooth talk. All at once he followed her like an ox going to the slaughter, like a deer stepping into a noose, till the arrow pierces his liver, like a bird darting into a snare, little knowing it will cost him his life. That's the temptation that is in. Don't blame God for the difficulties that come your way in life. I have to own that in the sovereignty of God, it's in His hand to permit. But when He permits the trials and temptations in our life, it is to produce strength, endurance, patience, faith, trust, maturity in our walk and trust in Him. Chloe read the text from Hebrews 4 today. Nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of Him to whom we must give an account. He knows everything. He knows what we're thinking. He knows what we're doing. He knows the intentions of our heart. Therefore, since we have a great high priest who has gone through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. Even though He knows everything about us, we have a go-between, a representative in Jesus before the Father. For we know that we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who's been tempted in every way just as we are, yet without sin. Jesus, Son of God, tempted by lust, tempted by greed, tempted by power, position, tempted to broadcast, "Wake up, God has arrived." He was tempted in every way that we are, yet without sin. And He understands our weaknesses because He walked in the flesh. He lived in the flesh some 33 years here. He knows what we know. He knows what we're like. And being one who understands us and knows us, the last verse in that passage says, Therefore, let us then approach the throne of grace with confidence, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in the time of need. So when temptation comes our way, just know it doesn't do you any good to try to hide or try to finagle so no one will know, because God sees and knows everything, and we account to Him. So live my life openly before Him and make my choices in His presence. And know that when I'm having a hard time, I'm struggling with something, that I'm tempted to act in ways that are contrary, that would be pleasing to God, I know that He is a resource ready to help me. He understands my weaknesses. He was tempted as I am. Therefore, come and find grace and mercy to help. Go to Him. Don't run from Him. Don't try to hide from Him, because you can't. That's the text that we're getting here about temptation. Don't blame God for the stuff that's coming your way. He did indeed certainly permit whatever is there, but for a good reason, a good cause. We know the temptation that Jesus faced, recorded in Matthew 4. Fasting for 40 days. The temptation. Change the rocks into bread and be happy. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God, was Jesus' response. Jump off the top of the temple pinnacle. Just jump off and the angels will protect you. That's a true statement. But Jesus said, don't tempt the Lord your God. I'm not going to bow to your pride. You're tempting me to be proud of who I am and what I have. Takes him to the highest mountain and shows him all the world. And he says, bow down and worship me, and I'll give all this to you. I said, stupid. He made it all. You've got nothing to give him. It's already his. You shall worship the Lord your God, only Him will you serve. So Jesus understands lust, tempted in every way that we are. He knows about lust, He knows about our weakness. Therefore, come. And Paul got an understanding of this when he wrote to the Corinthians in 1 Corinthians 10:13. No temptation has seized you except what is common to man. But God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond what you can bear. But when you are tempted, He will also provide a way out so that you can stand up under it. So when the temptation comes, don't fight it. Look for the out that God's provided. And most often, I've discovered in my life that the out is simply to say no. The consequence is not worth. It's not worth the temptation that I feel, the desire I have and want. It's not worth it. But sometimes the temptation, the way out, is to get out. If you're in a situation where there's a lot of temptation that's present around you, it's a party context or something like that, just leave. That's a way out. I remember working with high school kids years ago, and there was just a young man who had a real hard time with pornography. And between home, the school and home, there was a convenience store in the house in the neighborhood. And he'd stop by there because the owner had magazines with naked women in it. And he would stop to look at the pictures in the magazines before he went home. And he was always tempted with these thoughts, and lustful thoughts, a part of his life. And what was his escape? He walked a full 2 blocks around that house to get from school to home, so he would not be tempted to go in there again. He made a decision, a deliberate decision, to a way out, away from that temptation that was ruining him in his life. So I say there's a way out. Look for it. What has God provided for you? And I like what James is going to tell us in chapter 4, but it applies to what we're talking about here now. God opposes the proud, but He gives grace to the humble. Submit yourselves then to God. Resist the devil and he will flee from you. But it's a choice that we make. A choice not to give in to the temptation that's destructive to us. And the last two verses that we're looking at here today, verses 16 and 17, or 17 and 18, almost look like they don't belong until you consider what we've been talking about in terms of the trials and temptations to the end result. Verse 17 in chapter 1 of James says, "Every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows." He's dependable. He's consistent. God only gives perfect gifts, that which is just right for us. Even in difficult trials and temptations, designed to strengthen our faith and prove His dependability to meet us at the point of our need, even these are good and perfect gifts for us. 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 3 says, "But the Lord is faithful, and He will strengthen and protect you from the evil one." That promise is there, and it's ours to claim. Or leave it on the shelf and go do whatever we feel like we want to do and satisfy our flesh and our desires. But don't lose track of the truth that there's consequence to every choice we make. Make the choices that have good consequences. Produce good things in your life. And in James 1, verse 18, the last of this passage, James appeals to the ground of our confidence that we have in God. It says this, "He, God, chose to give us birth through the word of truth, His word, the gospel, that we might be a kind of first fruits of all that He created." That we become looking like what He created. We have a spiritual life through faith in Jesus and His life and His death on our behalf. But through His death we are forgiven. Through His death we now have the offer to receive what He's done for us and the right to be called the children of God, who are born spiritually. There's a spiritual birth that comes to us, a spirit that comes alive in us. God takes up residence in us when we come confessing our faith and trust in what Jesus did when He died on the cross. Don't lose track in the course of this week. Have you embraced by faith that Jesus is the Son of God, came some 2,000 years ago for one express purpose, written about for 1,400 years in the Old Testament, all the writings that are there, the promise of one to come, the Messiah, Jesus. He came fulfilling all of those prophecies, living out His life and offered His life as a sacrifice for us. He became our lamb sacrifice that was done in the temple. He offered our life as payment for our sin. For all the judgment that could come against us, He died in our place. If you have embraced that by faith, the Scripture tells us that the Spirit of God takes up residence in us. The Spirit, it says, who raised Jesus from the dead, dwells in you and me. So as you make your decisions in the course of your week, in the trials you face and the temptations that come your way, remember that God is resident in you. Remember Paul's confession in Colossians, that his whole message, the mystery that he had to share was Christ in you, the hope of glory. His presence in us is our hope. Live our life openly before Him. A man wrote a book titled The Audience of One. I live my life before the audience of one. And that's God. So James is concerned that the Jewish folk who were scattered throughout all of the Mediterranean area, that they would not lose heart in the difficulties that they were facing in their lives. That God was with them, present with them, and that they could trust Him. And that same message is true for us. I want to thank you, Lord, for your word. Thank you for the counsel that you give us. And thank you for our hope. Thank you for the way you consistently do what you say you'll do. That you are our protection. You are our strength. You always provide a way out. You always invite us to yourself. We always receive your grace and your mercy. Help us to embrace that, Lord, and live it by our days, each day. May we walk in a closer walk with you, just a full awareness of your presence. And may our lives be pleasing to you, be an honor to you. And we come in the name of Jesus, who allows us to